Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight to Flyleaf Books. We are your local independent bookstore, or some of you not local independent bookstore if you traveled for this. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. If you didn't get your book signed before, we will be continuing the signing line after. So we will just resume the queue like it was, kind of curled around the outside of the door and at that table. So just
it's a wild thing for an author to hear. That's amazing. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
This evening we have the pleasure of hearing from Amal El-Mohtar as she presents The River Has Roots with Alyssa Wong. Amal El-Mohtar. Yes. Amal El-Mohtar is an award-winning writer of fiction, poetry, and criticism. She is co-author with Max Gladstone of the phenomenon This Is How You Lose the Time War. She has been the New York Times science fiction and fantasy columnist since 2018. Alyssa Wong writes award-winning fiction, comics, and games. They are a story architect of Star Wars: The High Republic and their debut middle-grade novel, Star Wars: The High Republic: Escape from Valo, my bad. Co-written with New York Times bestselling author Daniel Jose Older, released in 2024.
Sweet.
Woo. Great audience. All right. I hope you all enjoy. If you haven't gotten a copy yet, we still have copies, I believe, of both of these authors' books, of both those books up front. And we will resume after the talk, but enjoy.
Thank you so much. Hi, Alyssa.
Oh my God, hi.
Hello.
It's been, so we
It's
have
been 1 week. Sorry. It is so much more than 1 week.
I'm gonna make you sing that song as many weeks as exists in like 10 years because it has been a hot minute.
It really has.
But it is such a pleasure to be here talking with you today. Can you hear us okay in the back?
Yeah, can you hear us? Okay, good.
Okay,
Awesome.
okay, good. I wrote down a bunch of questions, and I just wanna. I have so many things I want to ask you. I am in love with this book.
Oh, thank you.
I adore this book.
Thank you
It's
so much.
Gorgeous. So I mean, I guess, like, what question to ask you first? I know that you are an incredible prose writer. You are an incredible poet.
Thank you.
are an incredible critic. So my question for you is, you have all of these different areas of writing that you play with in terms of like how you use words. Yeah. So my question for you is, when you were writing this book, what were you thinking about in terms of language and rhythm and the way that you put these pieces together?
So when I was writing, this is kind of like this book has had a really weird genesis in that it began life as a short story that was supposed to be audio first. So it was supposed, like, I was commissioned to write an audio original story that had like some very programmatic requirements in terms of length and stuff. Like, we wanted to, last this much commute and sort of stuff like that. And because it was an audio thing, I was like, I know, I will write this like story that's sort of fic for a ballad that I like, that has been kicking around in my head for a long time. And there's this ballad type called like The Cruel Sister. And it's the ballad. I love ballads. I always feel like I need to preface this with, I extremely love ballads. I'm not saying ballads are problematic. Like, it's, these murder ballads are great. I love them. And, but there's this one, the whole premise of it is that there are two sisters. They're being courted by the same man. He is somehow not the villain of the ballad. And the younger sister is like his favorite. So the older sister's jealous. So she murders her younger sister by drowning her. Sure. And then, as you do. And then she, as the sister drowns, she goes through these like transformations. She gets turned into a swan. She gets turned into a harp. And then she usually ends up as an instrument that sings the song of her murder to like accuse her sister, and then like she comes to a gruesome end and justice is done in fairy tale fashion, And like I say, I love ballads and I love this. However, I am an older sister. I'm the eldest of four, and my little sister is like the most important person in the world to me. And I was just like, this, as much as I love this song, it doesn't tell me anything about my life. And I just feel like it should. So why don't I write something to fix it? So it was supposed to be a short story. And it was very much like following the ballad and just sort of like wherever and transforming it. But then the people who commissioned it were like, I know we've been through copy edits and have paid you, but we've just decided not to produce it. And I was like, really? So they reverted the rights back to me, and we sold them to Tor, and Tor was like, we like this a lot, but we want it to be longer. And I had intended, like, because it was audio first and stuff, and I had done all of this completely unnecessary world building, but that I was really excited about. I was like, I know, when I put this in print, I will put in all of that stuff that I'm really excited about. And then I wrote more of it, and none of it went in. Like, so there was like a moment where my editor was like, so this part of the book, like, it's referring to something, but I don't understand what. And I was like, oh no, that's the crucial element of world building that I absolutely built this whole thing around, and I never put it in the book. Okay, well, so anyways, it's there's still all of this world building that is just not there because it's not about that story, it's about these sisters. But that is sort of the gist of it. So in terms of like poetry, prose, criticism, the answer is sort of like ballad, which is, I am criticizing a ballad, which is sort of poetry and prose, and that it's a song. Actually, there's no prose at all in what I just said. I'm so sorry. I was up very early this morning. But yeah, I found that in terms of the language though, like if there was a touchstone for me, it was Hope Murley's Lead in the Mist, which is a stunningly gorgeous book that was written in 1920-ish. And I highly, highly recommend. But there's this narrative, this narratorial voice that is just the voice of a storyteller telling you a story, like the kind of like Once Upon a Time voice. And I found myself really missing that in like contemporary fantasy. And I was like, I wonder if we just made things old again a little bit. And so I wanted to bring it into there. So that was kind of at the back of my mind as well as I was doing it.
That was something that really stood out to me about this book is I feel like a lot of books have narration and narrator by necessity rather than as a present character.
Yeah.
And this book, I was reading it and I was like, I feel like I'm sitting here and someone is telling me a story.
Mm-hmm. Yay! That was the intention. I'm so happy.
Is it you? Yeah. No, I mean, I was like, Amel's telling me a story. Speaking of language and songs specifically, I was really curious as you were writing, knowing now that like this ballad was at the center of your process actually changes my question a little bit. But what I was originally going to ask was, when you were writing the lyrics to these songs, did you have music that in your head? Were you building new music? Were you building off of like pre-existing?
Oh yeah,
songs.
Oh, there are absolutely a lot of like pre-existing songs in there. So there's a song called "I Gave My Love a Cherry," and it goes, "I gave my love a cherry that had no stone," and so on. And that is like in there. There's a bit where like the actual ballad that I'm referencing, like is probably the first version of that I heard was the Bonnie Swans by Lorena McKennitt. So there is a part where that's getting like explicitly referenced, and it is absolutely the Lorena McKennitt's tune is the one in my head. And then there's a part, there is something in there that I'm trying to remember now, I think had the cadence of something that one of Anais Mitchell and Jefferson Hamer's takes on, like Anais Mitchell and Jefferson Hamer did a Child Ballads album, which is gorgeous. And I'm trying to remember now what it was. And if I'm just totally confused, I could just be confused. But the gist is that yes, it was mostly referencing things that our folk, like our trad are, as they get called, and stuff, and just playing with them a little bit and wanting them to be kind of recognizable, but transformed in this world. Something I keep thinking about with this is how, you know, in like so many zombie or vampire stories, they mysteriously take place in worlds where there are no zombie or vampire stories. Like it's always, yeah, these walkers we don't know what to call them except walkers because they walk, I guess, that sort of thing. And I didn't like the sisters are always singing ballads. Like this is a retelling of a ballad that is in a world where people know ballads. Like so I did want that to be kind of in there as a kind of just, I don't know, meta self-referencing thing.
That is so cool. I don't know, it's weird because like I don't have a ballad background. But I felt like I felt like I could hear it. But my question was like is Amal composing music for this? Or is this like John Barley to the tune of to the tune of Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso?
Oh
like,
my god. I want to do that now. It's so good. Yeah, man. The funny thing is that on the audiobook, my sister and I do actually sing and play music, and some of that is just improvised in the studio. So like, one of the things. This is kind of like a totally different question, but like there's a song in there that these sisters sing to these willow trees, and it's called the Professor's Hymn, and it is I like called it that because there is a Palestinian folk song called the Lover's Hymn. It's called that in English. In Arabic, it's just like northern song. But Tarwidi Shmeli. But anyway, I was listening to it a lot while doing this really difficult revision that was to make the book a lot longer. And just found myself going, yeah, you know what? That's the song that they sing to the willows. And my sister and I actually got to like sing that song on the audiobook, so it's there like in the background of it. And I really love that, especially because it's like a song that has something called mlula in it, which is this way of like introducing nonsense la sounds into words to make them unintelligible to people who aren't native speakers of Arabic, so that you can encode secret messages in it and communicate your secret message through song to people who are imprisoned by the people colonizing you, whoever those people happen to be at any given moment. So it's like there's this like secret keeping, secret passing thing that's happening in the song that it felt really, really good to put in the audiobook in a sort of like secret, I'm gonna slide this in here way, just a little solidarity in this audiobook. But we did that. We sang that together. So the only like original composition is the stuff that we improvised, but it is there, and that makes me really happy because my sister and I say every time, like, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you and myself.
No, I'm literally just listening. I'm super excited.
But like anytime in the book I describe what it feels like when the sisters sing together, it is just pure autobio, me describing how it feels for me when my sister and I sing together. And this is not to make any claim of like how good we are at singing. It's just the way I personally feel and stuff, but it really genuinely feels like something otherworldly is happening, and I don't feel this way when I sing with anyone else. It's just like her voice and my voice together feel really special, and yeah, it just feels real good.
That's amazing. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you asked for something specific in terms of like audiobook narrator casting.
Yeah, The Macmillan audio team were such a dream to work with. Like in particular, Steve Wagner, who was like heading this project really early on, was like, do you have thoughts for who you want to narrate this? Like what kind of voice and so on. And I have many thoughts actually. I think I specifically said, besides the many other things, the specific ask I was making was, I don't want someone to be putting on a British accent. I would really like for someone to actually like speak their actual accent, and I would like that accent to be a West Country accent from ideally Devonshire, because the Thistleford in the book is very explicitly modeled on. It's not explicitly modeled. I am telling you, it is modeled on Chagford, which is this little town. It's a stannery town, which means it's a town where whenever people did tin mining, they like paid duties to the crown in these towns, and so there was like a little administrative hub, and that's what a grammary town is based on. Anyway, so it's very modeled on Chagford. So I was like, a West Country accent, very important. Could the person also be Middle Eastern? And they found Gem Carmela, who in fact is both of those things. And I was so thrilled. And her narration is so gorgeous. And she actually sings the songs as well. So like when she encounters like, you know, italicized lines in the text, she sings them. Her voice is so warm and so gorgeous. And it's just, it felt like such a perfect fit. And I haven't listened to the whole audiobook, just like the excerpts that the audio team shared with me, but hearing the way they've soundscaped it is so wildly beyond anything I dreamt. Like they've got a little like rushing river sounds in the background, and they've got like birds, and it just sounds like it just sounds so good. My words are like, it's just really, really lovely.
That sounds amazing. I always have trouble like hearing other people read my stuff. I get really nervous.
Yeah. Does it make you? Do you feel like a thing in your body when that happens?
I do. I feel like I want to shrink out of my skin. Like I'm just like.
It makes me want to run away from what I'm hearing. It's not because it's bad. It's because it feels so intimate. It's like if I'm hearing someone else read something that I've written, it's. I wish I could like. I keep trying to find a metaphor for it. It's a little bit. It's like, you know, if you look at yourself in a camera where the image is flipped, it's like if you were having that experience, but it was so beautiful that you had to run away from it. Like, it's like if you were looking in a mirror and there was like a strange fairy creature looking back at you in reverse who also sort of was you, but also was just like much lovelier than you. I don't know. It's just, that's vaguely the feelings. It's like something very beautiful and intimate is happening and I can't bear it. Like I can only take it in like small increments. But yeah.
I feel like someone's looking at me, but like really close up, like almost like if they took like a really thin slice of me and were like slowly licking it. I'm like, no one is ever supposed to know that. Like, no one's supposed to know what that slice tastes like. I don't think that. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Amal is bringing this really beautiful stuff, and I'm just like, what if you licked the slice?
This is reminding me of when, God, I can't remember if it was you or Dongwon, our agent, who like was like, oh, have you read Alyssa's story about sisters? I know that you love stories about sisters, Amal. You should definitely read the story that Alyssa wrote about some sisters. And I was like, I love Alyssa's writing. I'm going to read it right now. And I was not okay for years.
Which one was it?
It was the one where she wants to wear her sister's skin.
Oh! No, I swear it's not as bad as it sounds.
It's an amazing story. It is very upsetting. It felt like a practical joke had been played on me. I was just completely not primed to expect it.
It's funny because I was reading this book and I was like, oh my god, the way Amal writes about sisters is so beautiful. And I was like, oh, I like to write about sisters. And then I was like, oh, it's not the same. It's not the same.
Two sides of coins from completely different currencies.
It's so true. And the skin story you were talking about is a Snow White retelling, but it's secret.
Oh!
You would never know.
I can't believe I missed that. That's amazing. I love that. That was secret.
So I don't know if you remember this, but while we're talking about listening to things that are really difficult to hear and then having those moments where you're like, this is so beautiful, I can't look away. I don't know if you remember this, but you read one of my poems once.
Yes.
That is the only piece of media that I have been able to listen to all the way through because your reading is so beautiful.
Oh, that's all.
It's really good, you guys.
Like, those were Uncanny, right?
Yeah. That was a love poem. So actually, also speaking of beautiful things, fairies.
Yes.
I feel like why fairies is not the right question, but but it is also.
Yeah,
like, why
absolutely.
fairies?
This is so funny because I did an interview with Locust magazine that came out this month, and the way that Locust does interviews is that a person is interviewing you in real time. You're having a conversation, and they make a transcript of it, but then they take out all the questions. So you just have this like wall of you talking which is a nightmare for me personally. I already talk a lot. But so because they do that, I also like have no idea how they're like presenting it and stuff until I see the finished thing. And their tagline on the cover was like, interview with Amal El-Mohtar, quote, obviously, comma, there are fairies. Which is, I guess, a thing I said and completely don't remember saying, but it's there in print. So, but yeah, fairies. So for my sins, I have been doing English degrees for like a stupidly long time. I have stopped now. I have stopped doing that. I'm in recovery from doing English degrees. But I was doing a PhD on representations of fairies and other supernatural creatures in Romantic era British writing some time ago. And my interest in it was specifically because of what it said about constructions of national British identity at like the turn of the 19th century. And there's a lot to say. I think it was a great project. I don't need to talk about my doomed PhD. I'm ABD, and we'll leave it at that. But one of the things that I was fascinated by is that in a British context, there is this long history of associating things, giving beautiful objects a fairy history when actually they come from the Middle East. So there's this beautiful cup called the Luck of Eden Hall, and it's this like gorgeous like glass filigreed with metal goblet. I can't remember where in Scotland it is now, but it's called the Luck of Eden Hall, and it's got all this legendary around it that is about like this came from the fairies, and so long as it's here, Eden Hall will have good luck and stuff. And it's like a 13th century Syrian artifact. And it was fascinating to me. There's also this whole like trajectory of in something like A Midsummer Night's Dream, there's like the little page boy that Titania is obsessed with, like, comes from India. Like, what are Oberon and Titania doing in India? Who knows? Like, there's just this association of so-called extravagant fancies with the Near and Far East. And I found that fascinating, especially because like there's this turn in like British sort of geopolitical life that is all about excising that from, like, do you have like a very Protestant, specifically British mind, I guess, and seeing these elements as things that like need to be purged from it. So I was really fascinated by like those tensions, especially where empire and things are involved. And for me, whenever I want to think about fairyland, because any story that kind of involves an our world and an other world necessarily involves borders. And as soon as there are borders, I start to get in my feelings. Whenever there are borders, I feel like that invites a lot of questions about like, what are the relationships, on either side of this? And in a lot of the world building that I didn't put in the book, a lot of the stuff that I found myself thinking of was, what if fairies are actually terrified of us? Like, what if like these creatures that we are supposed to be like these elegant, mysterious, powerful, seductive, alluring, etc. creatures, that we associate with threat and like the stealing of children and blah, 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 are actually extremely vulnerable to us, and not in the sense of iron, but are actually extremely vulnerable to our voices and to singing and stuff like that. And the why fairies part in terms of the ballad was more specifically because I like to think about fairies, and the fact that in the ballad, the way that Sister gets turned into a harp is literally that she drowns in the river, she gets turned into a swan, then a miller's daughter that just suddenly appears, has never been in the ballad before this moment. A miller's daughter dressed in red sees this swan, and she goes, "Father, father, here swims a swan. She's very like a gentlewoman." And then she washes up on shore and she's just a dead woman. And then there comes a harper passing by, as one does. And the harper just starts turning her into a harp.
Sure.
And it's like he made harp pins of her fingers fair. He made harp strings of her golden hair. He made a harp of her breastbone, and straight it began to play alone. And I had so many questions about like, who does this? Like if you're a harper, presumably you have a harp. Do you just like wander around looking for dead women who've like drowned to like make more harps? And if you're making a harp that then plays by itself, like, are you a harper? Are you just a harperer? Like, are you just like creating, like automating harp play? It's like harp AI. No, I didn't. I never thought that before. Oh my god. I'm redacting that.
Well, the thing there too is I hadn't thought about it before, but if he successfully was just like, oh, a dead woman, perfect, I make a harp, and then made this beautiful, incredible, like self-playing thing.
Yeah.
You know that's not his first time doing it.
Right? I swear, I found myself thinking, we've all seen Brave, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah. So like there's like the witch who turns people into bears. And it's like, I absolutely believe that that's the only thing she does. Like that's her deal. That's the only magic she does. I'm gonna do magic at this, that is gonna be a bear. I'm just gonna make a lot of bears. And then the harper is just the same way. I'm just gonna make everything a harp. I've got a hammer and all it does is turn things into harps.
I feel weird saying I vibe with that, but I do. Like,
as I was saying the words, I was like, Alyssa, you should listen to more ballads.
I was very concerned about where the second half of that sentence was going. I do want to listen to more ballads, so I'd love a ballad recommendation list from you.
Oh my god, that's so dangerous. I will do it. I will so do this. I'll make you a giant list.
Sorry, I don't know if I can swear. I'm still thinking about the witch with bears and the harper with harper. So my question for you is actually going to be: did you have a favorite fairy story growing up?
I did have a fairy, and so my favorite one was the Snow Queen, actually. And the thing about it, I remember the book that I read it in. It was I think like the 1983 Random House Book of Fairy Tales, and I only know. I might be wrong about the date, but like I looked it up at some point because I could remember the cover so vividly, and I just like did a Google image search and was like, oh, I guess that was the book. And it was older than me and stuff, but it was in our house, and I just found myself reading it. And the thing that really struck me about the story was that I was by the point when I read it, and I can't remember how old I was. Definitely like under 10, but I felt like I had already intuited the patterns of fairy tales and like, things in threes, princesses, blah, blah, blah. And this was a story that was so clearly of the land of fairy tales, but it wasn't following any of those patterns. And the reason it wasn't is because it's a literary fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. It's not like received from like, folkloric tradition and stuff. Elements of it are probably, but it is something that like was explicitly written. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that like everything about it felt so potent. And can we swear? Is that Alex? Is that all right?
Who's gonna stop me?
I don't know. There's a live stream. I don't want to.
Mods are asleep.
That's mods are asleep. Mods are asleep. Cost about fairy tales. I've caught your eye now, Alex. Can we cuss? Is that fine?
Is the sound fun?
Oh, the sound is fine. I was going to say fuck a lot. Is that okay? Is that cool? All right, great. Yeah, I fucking loved Gerda so much, like the little robber girl. I'd never seen a relationship in a fairy tale. I think I'd never seen a relationship in a fairy tale that was like this. I was gonna say positive. I was very young when I read it, but it's very hot. But it was just, like the idea that like Gerda literally says not Gerda, the little robber girl. Gerda is the actual protagonist. I've forgotten her name. She might just be called Little Robber Girl. But she literally like says to her, like, you're mine and I'm keeping you and I'm going to protect you, but only because you're mine. You belong to me and stuff like that. And it was just like, interesting thing for one to encounter at a formative age. But she's like obsessed with her, and she cares about her, but in a scary way. And it was just very interesting. And meanwhile, like, she's going through all these adventures to, you know, rescue this absolutely useless boy who's completely forgotten who she is.
I got a splinter.
I got a splinter in my eye. Oh no, now I've got to be evil and horrible to you. It's just terrible. Anyway, I loved that story. There were like all these elements of it, like she, you know, when she tries to throw her shoes into the river and the river keeps sending them back, and there were so many things that I absolutely loved. So to answer your question, yes, a clear favorite was The Snow Queen. It stayed with me indelibly, and I deeply loved it.
It's really good.
It's so good. Do you have a favorite fairy tale?
Oh, me. I also love The Snow Queen. I think my favorite's Tamlin.
See, I think of Tamlin as a ballad rather than a fairy tale.
Oh,
but yeah.
I've never heard it.
Okay, so what I need you to understand about Tamlin is that, because you asked me to make you like a list of ballads.
Yeah.
Tamlin, I found myself completely by accident, collecting versions of it, and I had like at last count 13 like different versions of people have sung. It's a very long song. Like if I were to make you a list of the list of like the Tamlin ones that I have, it would be a long list. But it's very good. It's very, very good. I'm gonna do it.
I'm gonna sing like a few bars.
Yeah,
I totally thought you were gonna start singing.
Just like.
I'm so sleep deprived that this could happen. I just like, tell me, do you really want me to do this? The thing is, the one that really sticks in my head is Anais Mitchell's version, which is the only one that doesn't have fairies in it. Which she was really cheeky about. I saw her like perform this in this like winter festival in Glasgow, and I was so excited to see her perform the song, and that I hadn't heard the album yet because they had just come out, and she was like, so we're going to sing Tamlin, and I was like, and she was like, but we're American and we decided that we're not doing any fairies, and I was like, what? And then, you know, it was adorable, and so that was the one that stuck in my head. Janet sits in her lonely room sewing a silken sleeve. And I can't remember the rest because I'm standing in front of people. I'm sorry. That's enough of that. It's probably not even the beginning of the song. It's somewhere in the middle.
Thank you. Oh my god, dude. I was not expecting this. Thank you.
Do you know what thing that I do in workshops sometimes is like to teach students the difference between poetry and prose? I'm always like, you know, lead them through a thing where I'm like, so what do you think the difference is between poetry and prose? We talk about them as opposites, but what are the differences actually? And they will list a bunch of things. They're like, okay, here are characteristics of poetry. And then my like cruel trick that I play on them is like, haha, you think all these are characteristics of poetry, but let me show you where they all exist in prose. So what actually is the difference? And this is all a way of me cleverly leading them to my definition of what the difference is, which I will now tell you without having put you through the pedagogy. And the difference to me is the difference between singing and speaking. Like that poetry is like singing and prose is like speaking, and we literally use different parts of our brain to do those things. Like neuroscience shows this and stuff. And one of the ways that I illustrate this in the workshop is that as I'm describing this, I'm like, we experience singing differently, both when we do it and when we hear it. Because if you started to hear me sing, you'd start to feel really uncomfortable all of a sudden. Like there's an absolute like category shift in the experience when someone is talking to you versus singing at you. And I learned this. This is the last thing I'll say about this. Just like I figured this insight out because of our dear and mutual friend and agent, Dongwon Song, ironically named in this instance, who cannot stand to have people burst into song near them. And like, really? It makes them very uncomfortable. And I didn't learn this because I burst into song around them. It was a different situation, but I learned this and I was like, that's so interesting because I wonder why that is. And I thought about it and then this was my answer. It was like, yeah, you have not consented to this new and intimate experience of like it's a this shift in register essentially.
I was gonna say I'm not a poet, but I was thinking about
except that
this.
you wrote a gorgeous poem that I read that we literally referenced.
Thank you, but not. I was thinking about this, and I think for me the big marker is intimacy.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when someone's reading a poem, I feel like it feels like such an intimate experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone is reading an audiobook of a prose novel, maybe not so much.
Mm-hmm.
Like that almost feels like it's for a wider audience, but like for some reason the poetry I really love feels like it is for me in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully everybody who reads it or hears it experiences that same feeling of being like, this is for me in this moment of connection, just us.
Absolutely. Did you ever read The Wicked and the Divine? Like
Yeah.
So this comic by Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey. And the premise of it is that like every 90 years these gods incarnate in artists, or like specifically in singers, and there are all these like different singers in this moment, but they incarnate only for 2 years and then they die. And this like is supposed to be their span of life, but they also can't be killed unless they're killed while they're singing. Like, so they're these gods, they have all this power, you know, they can shoot lightning bolts and stuff like that, but they're also enormously vulnerable when they are doing the thing that ostensibly grants them their godhood. And I always think about that, like, as like, Kieran is brilliant, and like, I love the way that they think about music all the time. But like, that just felt so potent to me, that in the act of like generating their most powerful effect is when they are most vulnerable, and that just feels so true to the experience both of singing and of like reading or performing poetry. Feels that way to me.
That is gorgeous. I think it's funny when I think about The Wicked and the Divine, I'm always like, how do you build those hooks into the end where it's like, oh, by the way, would you like one more page? Devastating.
Yes.
See you next issue.
Yes.
But
They're so
no,
good at their jobs.
they're so good. I had a question I was going to ask you, and I have completely forgotten. So instead, I would love to ask, I feel like we start a lot of stories, and then not all of them get finished. So you have these like bright sparks of stories, and then sometimes you stick with one, and then that's the one that you finish.
Yeah.
And there's always some reason why. So why this one?
That's such a beautiful question, Alyssa. My God. I love that. I'm going to think about that for a long time after I actually answer it. I mean, there's the very pragmatic question of just like, this was commissioned. So there was a sort of a contractual obligation. But I had the like idea percolating in my head for literally years, like literally just wanting to do something with this ballad that provoked these feelings in me. And I think probably a thing that I'm going to reach for as an answer is also the reason that it took me a very long time to finish it, which is that like it was commissioned and I was writing it, and then I had two very dear friends pass away within a month of each other during the pandemic, and one of them was Petra Mayer, who was an editor at NPR, my editor at NPR, when I was like writing reviews for them for a long time. It was very sudden and very devastating. And the other was my harp teacher, Huda Nassim, to whom this is like partly dedicated. And that had like, she had been unwell for a while, but it was still just a circumstance where it made it very, very clear to me that like, I just found myself thinking very much of all the opportunities I had to spend more time with her that I hadn't taken up, and there was a lot of like deep shame and pain like bound up in that, and the Huda passing away made me like it affected my relationship to music and to harp stuff in particular, because all of my harp books have her handwriting in them. Like I would just like go to open a book and just like see it. It made me understand things about the experience of grief in a certain way, where like parts of the city just become sort of haunted, like where she used to live, a place that I pass by in Ottawa all the time. I always have this moment of passing by it and going, oh, this place, and then having to go through this sequence of like remembering that she's not there and that someone else is living there and stuff. And so I really got stuck on writing it for a while before I was able to like come back to it. And the initial version that I wrote, like the shorter version, was actually like it didn't go as hard as this one does, and I knew that. Like it was just I showed it to friends and they were like, you have like the shape of the story here, but in order for this to feel like it lands or works, you really need to actually like have more pain and grief in there and stuff. And I had been really kind of flinching from it, and then it just ended up being in there. And this is so weird to talk. I mean, it's such a beautiful question, Alyssa, and I find myself answering it in like in the most sort of this took a dark turn way. But like the other big thing about how it became what it currently is Reza. Like I was revising it at a time where the horrors were so extraordinarily constant and unbearable, and trying to write something that's ostensibly about like fairies and sisters and love and stuff was extremely difficult when what I wanted to be writing was like a long sustained scream for several months. And there came like a point where I remember where I was when I realized this had to happen. Was like I was like on a walk in some woods in rural Quebec, and I suddenly remembered like a thing about my sister and my childhood that I needed to put in the book. And as soon as I thought that, then it felt like I've had this like full body shudder and realized it had to go in, where it had to go in, what it had to do in the book, and it made everything sort of click in place. So I feel like the the why of like why it had to become what it was ultimately was just, sometimes when I'm writing things, I think that I'm writing a certain thing and doing a certain thing with it, and the act of writing carves this channel through which the things that actually need to pour out come like gushing, and then those things change the slope of the river ultimately, right? Oh look, I brought it back to the title. I didn't even mean to do that. But did you know that a bend in the river is called a meander? It's like, I love that it's actually a noun. Like we have like the verb like to meander and meandering, but this actually comes from the fact that like the way rivers are shaped are called meanders. So yeah, that's my segue.
No,
from that.
I mean that's the truth of it, right? Like every story is different. I think that something I used to tell my students when I was teaching like intro creative writing was like, the reason I want you to finish your stories is that we have so much practice beginning and so much less practice finishing.
Yes.
And
yes.
I don't want you to be afraid of finishing a story if you're worried it's not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
Finish your story.
Yeah.
Because that'll give you the confidence to finish the next one and the next one.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this story is... I feel weird saying it feels like it's very personal, but it obviously is.
It is. It
like
absolutely is.
It feels very, very personal, and I deeply want to ask what that thing was.
Oh, for sure. I'll tell you. It's not a secret, and it's actually like in the acknowledgements. So when we were little, so again, I was 7. My sister was 5. We were living in Lebanon, and we went to visit. We were living with my mom and my grandmother. And we went to visit friends in this little village called Kfermishki. And it's like a little village. And in little villages in Lebanon, like people don't have like fences or like boundaries in the yards. It's all like, there's a commons. And my sister and I like went outside playing as we did, like with the animals that were around, and we started chasing a chicken, as one does. And we chased this chicken too far. We chased this chicken like beyond like the boundaries of the place that we were staying, and nothing was familiar all of a sudden. Like suddenly, like everything looked strange and different, and I became very, very aware that like I was the eldest. I was in charge of my sister. I had no idea where we were. We were capital L lost. Like, and the other thing about little villages in Lebanon is that they have like, you know, there was like some wilderland, or it felt that way to me. Like there were like little copses of trees and like little hillocks and stuff like that. And I could tell that there were houses with people. Like we weren't in deep woods or anything, but I didn't know who they were, and you weren't supposed to talk to like strangers and stuff. And my sister noticed that we were lost, and she was like, "Are we lost?" And I was like, yeah, maybe. And then she started crying, and she said, "Are we gonna get eaten by wolves?" And I was like, "I don't think there are wolves in Lebanon," not knowing at all. I was like, no, I was not sure about that. And she was crying because she was crying, I was crying, and all I could think was that my mother would be so upset and terrified and like at us being lost, and I couldn't stop thinking of like my mother's feelings about this and how badly I didn't want her to be afraid. And we walked and walked, and it felt like no sense of time whatsoever. It felt like we were outside of time. And then we came to what, in my memory, was this little old woman. And when I say little, I mean like in my memory, she was not much taller than me at 7, and her face was very wrinkled. But also children have no idea how old adults are, so I cannot say. Okay. And so this woman was very brusque. And she was like, "Why are you crying?" And we were like, "We're lost." And she was like, "Well, who are you staying with?" And we were like, the Ayoubs, which was a ridiculous thing to say because literally everyone in that village was named Ayoub. But she must have like, you know, we were strangers. And so she, with village knowledge, was like, "You're probably the people visiting over here." So she was like, "The house is over there." And we had like inscribed like a whole circle around the village apparently, and we went like running home, and we were running to the house, and we were like in floods of tears and so upset, and saw my mom, and she had not realized we were gone. and so like so that experience, autobio in the book, you know, except that in the book they chase a chicken into fairyland, because that's what it felt like. It felt like, you know, we entered into this other world where there was no time, and we were lost, and we were afraid we would never find our way home and just be lost forever, and felt this like with this deep intensity of just being children. It's such a like it's a very potent memory to me that I revisit a lot, and realizing that there was space in this book for it to fit and kind of be a hinge in the story for like things to happen through was enormous. And then, you know, what's also in the acknowledgements is just that it's impossible to write that without, you know, reckoning with, like, while I was writing the acknowledgements, Israel was bombing Lebanon. And I was just thinking of like little girls who were 7 and 5, who'd be our age, who would be fleeing their homes and not having, you know, whimsically terrifying experiences of chasing chickens, but just be actually horrifically terrified, dying, losing their parents, not able to return, not knowing if they'll ever be able to return home. And just feeling this lineage. Like the time when we were in Lebanon was between 1991 and 1993. And that was this like lull in the fighting before like the Civil War kind of ended. And when I think of like what my parents lived in, like they lived through the Civil War, they fled the Civil War, what their parents lived in, more war. Like my grandfather was imprisoned for like having secular politics and stuff, multiple times. And like that's what my father lived with, was a father who was always like in prison for his beliefs and stuff. And like then I think of like there just this like long lineage just kind of stretches back into like recognizing that there is not a generation of my family that I can see or have contact with that hasn't been subject to imperial war, and there's a weight to that when you want to like write a book about fairies, you kind of really feel pressing into the tissue of the thing. And at the same time that Israel was bombing Lebanon, I was reading headlines from like right-wing media in this country that were like, Lebanon's not a real country. It's just a staging ground for militants. And it was just like calling a sovereign nation not a real country felt like forcing a kind of fairyland onto it. Like you are ultimately making this place that actually exists into something that is a figment of your imagination, into something that is ephemeral, into something where people don't actually live, don't actually bleed, don't actually get murdered. They just die. They just mysteriously die. So anyways, like again, here's my dark turn in this book. If like, you know, none of that is explicitly in the book, but now you know that it is implicitly in the book. So yeah, I can't remember what your question was, but I hope I answered it.
No, I mean, that's okay. I've just been listening. I mean, like,
I think we got a time warning from Alex as well, but I have no idea what time it is.
I think every story is kind of like that, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's a story that everybody else gets when it's done.
Yeah.
And then there are the layers of stories that, you know, the story that you thought of, the story that sort of was rising up in you as you were writing it, the story that was rising up in you after that because of that story. It's these layers of sediment. And I don't think you get the thing that everyone sees on top without those things.
Right.
So I love your book.
Thank you. Thank you, Alyssa. It means so much to me.
Oh.
Do we have time for questions?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Is that cool? All right, awesome. Hooray. Oh, there's a question at the back. Yes, you, the black mask, green top. Yes.
I've been wanting to ask this question for years. So I brought up a couple stories, including yours, and some before, that have the whole thing of dead woman heart thing. And so for a while, I thought my theory was it's an editor that really loves it. Now I'm wondering, is it just something in the water? Like, do you think there's like some cultural thing that has like gotten into authors' heads where like I must write the story of the dead woman that become harps?
That is fascinating. So for anyone to hear, it's like, is there something in the water that is making people write stories about dead women who become harps? I love this question. I mean, the ballads have a long tradition, and I think that the ballad itself existing is kind of an interesting testament to a few things. One of them is that harps are devastatingly weird instruments. They're actually strung with gut. So like my harp, I have two harps. My big harp has sheep gut strings in the middle register, and like wire strung silk in the bass register, and nylon for the high one. But like historically they were strung with gut. So there is this like really like literally visceral component to what a harp is. The fact that in the ballad, it's always like they made harp strings of her hair. Hair would be terrible harp strings. Like there's no tension there, right? But the other thing about harps is that they're very intimate instruments to play. In that to play a harp, you literally lean it back against your chest. You like, and so you're cradling it, you're holding it, literally also between your legs. I mean, just like it's so funny to me when people talk about like harps have this like sort of 18th, 19th century association with being lascivious, and the rationale given for this is that when you play a pedal harp, you know, your ankles are in evidence, and it's like, ooh, ankles. And I'm like, have you looked at literally any other element of playing a harp? Like, it's all horny. Like, you're spreading your legs, you're putting this like giant thing in between it. It's an attractive instrument. It's very charismatic. Sorry. I did not mean that sentence to much but all to say that like when you have like this instrument that is already like very sexualized, that is like associated with women and like women's instruction and stuff, because it's like an accomplishment to play, I think that it becomes very there's a kind of, I'm not going to say natural, but like understandable association between a woman's body and an instrument that, you know, that can speak where a woman can't, you know, like so many impositions of silence existing on women anyways. The idea that you could, you know, become an instrument that can only make sound and stuff. There's something very strong in that. And I also think there is something about, the idea of just taking dead matter and transforming it into something that sings is kind of what art is. So there, I think all of that is like a kind of ferment there. In terms of like this moment in particular, I couldn't speak to that exactly, because I mean, I've been swimming in this my whole life. So for me, it's just been this continuity of like women becoming harps and or other things. Like, but honestly, stories of transformation and of like women's body, specifically women's bodies transforming. I also think there's like a lot of just historical psychic ferment in like how many changes a bewombed body endures like over the course of a lifetime, and where that intersects with like, you know, constructions of gender and your place in society and stuff. There are so many there's so many fairy tales of like, you know, beastly bridegrooms and stuff like that, that I think are also kind of about the transformations that you want to see in the world when you have no power and just kind of are imagining these things. I think all of that kind of ties together. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And also listening to this now is making me realize part of why I liked Tam Lin so much as a kid.
Yeah.
Because it's a man transforming into many different untouchable, unholdable things.
Yes.
And the woman being like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere.
Yes.
And you know, it doesn't matter that the fire is burning me. I'm going to keep holding on. And there's something really lovely about that. Also, this made me think, I have not written a dead woman harp story, and maybe I should.
What? No.
My simple answer about the catgut thing was, I was like, oh, bodies made of meat, harps made of meat.
Yes.
Like,
A meat harp.
I'm really hungry. I'm sorry.
Your sister's made of meat, right?
My sister. At this point, who knows?
Yes. Green mask.
Yes, I have a question from my teenager, who was not forced to read This Is How You Lose the Time War, but heard me gasping. Because I've never done anything in my life. And my teenager also is very into writing, is working on a couple of novels.
Oh, wonderful.
And before I came here, they said, please ask, how do you create narrative distance?
Ooh. God, knowing that that's a question from a teenager is just so dazzling. Please tell.
Say that again. It's just so hard right now. Just say again, dazzling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a dazzling question. How genuinely, like, listen. There's like, I mean, I've taught creative writing, and just like teaching someone the concept of narrative distance is something that I don't associate with teenagehood. So I think this is already like prodigy territory, and you should feel real good about that, is my opinion. How do you create narrative distance?
Youth in particular.
Gosh. You know, it's something that really I mean, there's it's not really a cop-out answer to say. It really changes from story to story. It's like, and because I wrote short fiction for much longer than I wrote slightly longer fiction, this is the longest thing I've written to date. It's 20,000 words. It's longer than half of Time War, and therefore the longest thing I've written to date. It's not very long, but so all to say that like because I wrote short stories for a long time, and every short story I tried to make as different from the one that I'd done before, because they feel like this really great space in which to experiment and like accomplish a thing, like set yourself a task and like accomplish it, or pursue a question, or create an effect, or whatever. So it really depends. And like, I guess, you know, if your teen had asked me this directly, I would be like, could you give me an example of what you like? And I will tell you like how I did that specifically. In general though, like I'm not thinking about creating narrative distance when it happens. It's more usually subordinated to an idea of what I want the story to be doing at a given moment, and that means creating, you know, closeness or distance at various points as I want, as I want a reader to like interact with it, and sometimes as I want to experience the thing that I'm writing. So I think that it's more something that happens as a consequence, as a number of different things that I'm doing in a moment, versus like I will now set out to create narrative distance, and this is how I will do it, if that makes sense. If it's something that they're having trouble doing, I would actually probably be more curious to be like, why do you want to create narrative? Do you know what I mean? So that would be my answer. But yeah. Also, they sound very cool, and they should do some writing workshops, I think. Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to try and answer questions more quickly. Yes.
Oh God, it's went out of my head. No. Okay, so you mentioned that this is the longest thing that you've written ever. I'm curious about what draws you to writing shorter fiction, especially in the context of one of the things that I love about your work, and also Jeanette Winterson, like other people who've had a lot of influence on me as a writer, is how clearly you've built a lot more than is included there, and how you decide what goes in.
That's lovely. So for me, partly the fact of writing short fiction is just that I, retrospectively, the glib answer, but probably quite true, is that I have ADHD. And I've, but there is something about the desire to like complete something, and I've always had difficulty writing something long. Like in like undergraduate essays, the most common like marginal note I'd receive is like unpack and stuff. And so this is actually very ironic considering how much I ramble when I speak. When I write, I am very concise, or as much as I can be. I'm always like, I feel like I'm trying to condense and like polish and make precise and specific every sentence in a way that makes me write very slowly, is the other thing. So it's not an intentional choice, except in as much as I want to finish things. I now have to, by contract, write 2 novels. So, but a short story collection is coming out next year. But beyond that, I need to write 2 novels, and I'm sort of just not thinking about that. So yeah. But also every time I write a short story, I do find myself going, because of what you have observed very generously, is that, yeah, there is a lot going on, and I do find myself going, I could write a novel in this short story world. Probably. Have I? No. Will I? Maybe. But yeah, to answer your question. There was another question here?
I just wanted to say, if you do make a list of recommended ballads, could you put it in your newsletter?
100%. Okay. I will do that. I will do that, and I will be like, this is for Alyssa. It will be, if you are interested, I have a newsletter on my website, which is amalelmohtar.com. And if you want to sign up for it, it is great. It is free. It is just me sending out a newsletter periodically and stuff. But yes, I 100% want to do this, and I want to do this for all of y'all. So yeah.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
You guys have been an amazing audience. Thank you so much. You're so sweet. Thank you. Great. I'm going to set up at the back again.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.